Thank you, Headmaster, distinguished guests, board and faculty members, family members, men of Auckland Grammar School past and present. A warm welcome to you all as we observe this day as a community that truly understands the human cost of war, as reflected by the names of so many past students and masters, recorded with sadness and with gratitude on our memorial, many whose photographs, promising a future tragically stolen, still adorn these walls. I am very humbled to have been asked to address you today, and I do sincerely hope I can do justice to this occasion. It is fitting that we are gathered here in this magnificent school hall, which was officially opened just one day after the first official observance of ANZAC Day in New Zealand in 1916. It seems only right and just that we are here in what stands as a living tribute to an age of distant memories, young lives echoing still in the hurried footsteps of school days and in the collective restlessness of the surrounding classrooms that have served the city and indeed this country for more than a century. It is perhaps somewhat emblematic of the determination of the school that when this hall was brought to life, it was through the first 2 years of World War I, a time of unimaginable destruction, the foundation stone having been laid by the Earl of Liverpool on December 1, 1913. I've tried to picture, while preparing this address, what traces of hope for a better future must have existed in this place on the occasion of its opening. As K.A. Trembath noted in his centennial history of the school, by 1916, the war effort had outstripped this country's wealth and population. To send one more man to the endless sacrifice of the Western Front seemed impossible. If only that were the case. As we know, many more young New Zealanders, our old boys among them, were to be sent to fight and to die in the subsequent 2 years of the war, which is why I pause to reflect on that day, April 26, 1916, as this school at last was able to open its permanent home. And while pausing, I like to think there was, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary on the battlefields of Europe, reason for hope within these walls and beneath this ceiling. It pays to note that by the time this hall was officially opened, more than 50 old boys and masters had already perished in battle. More than 600 were on active service. The boys who entered these classrooms for the first time and who took their seats on the forms upon which you sit were already accustomed to the daily briefings of Grammar's war dead. By the end of the war, as the headmaster has already enumerated on, that number would rise to 309. Bernard, the son of Headmaster Tibbs, among them. Can you begin to fathom how a headmaster could address this school with news of his own son's death? That is a level of stoicism that is beyond my comprehension. These numbers today, more than a century on, feel arbitrary, but consider this: 30 young men who entered Auckland Grammar School in 1907 alone would lose their lives between 1914 and 1918. That represents 20% of that year's entrant cohort. Extrapolate that figure if you would and consider the school roll of today. How would this community respond to that number now being more than 100? What impact would that have on us all? I, most probably like you, can't begin to count that cost. In the School Chronicle of 1918, R.W. Firth wrote of the impact of the war years on the student body. As noted in the Grammar Way, 150 Years of Auckland Grammar, he first spoke of the excitement everyone felt in the opening stages of the war, and how hopes had been high for a swift resolution and, by extension, a great victory for the Empire. Still bearing his and his nation's patriotism like a shield to sadness, he says, "But the weeks lengthened into months, and victory had not come. Then came the call for men, and eagerly the boys and masters of the school responded." Eagerly the boys and masters of the school responded. Today, we honour those who served and remember those who died. But we should also take this time to reflect on what these men could have become had they not volunteered to serve their country and their empire, had they not been conscripted to replace and ultimately to join those whose remains shall forever nurture foreign soils, had they not been returned, permanently altered, physically, mentally, spiritually. Since its inception, the school has desired to send into the world, according to former Master J.F. Russell, the good average boy who makes 75% of the school and who goes out into the world and does a very solid, if not conspicuous, job as a citizen in his own walk of life. How many of these good average boys never had the chance to be a citizen in his own walk of life? We think of that now because what underpins this school, what has always been at the heart of its teachings, its culture, its resolute defence of its most cherished traditions, and its complete rejection of the various ill-conceived ideologies of envy that have consistently sought to undermine its position, is service. Yes, as a school, Auckland Grammar is rightly proud of the myriad achievements of its many esteemed alumni, but it has always struck me that our greatest respect has been reserved for those old boys who have sought to give more than to receive, who have placed the greater good above the individual accolade, who have been contributors to the world rather than the beneficiaries of their perceived privilege, who have believed in something greater than themselves. By the end of the First World War, it is estimated that more than 1,500 grammar men had seen active service. Almost 1 in 5 died. 5 masters among them. Also among them, F.R. Wilson, the school's 5th All Black, who played 2 matches for the national side in 1910. Our school's eminent archivist Peter Staines has written of 2nd Lieutenant Frank Reginald Wilson, who entered Auckland Grammar School in 1899, attested for the war in March 1915, and died as a result of injuries suffered in that most wasteful and woeful Battle of the Somme in September 1916. Wilson first saw action in Gallipoli, arriving with other reinforcements in November 1915 to bolster the depleted troops along the new front line on the rhododendron spur following the Battle of Chunuk Bair. Perhaps old boy of the school R.A.K. Mason's words might best describe that forlorn setting. In Sonnet of Brotherhood he writes, "Here, in this far-pitched, perilous, hostile place, this solitary, hard-assaulted spot." What Wilson must have thought when he landed. The New Zealand troops had been decimated. Those who remained were frail, malnourished and exhausted. Winter ravaged the men further. Trenches were inundated by rainwater, snow, freezing winds. Many men died not as a result of further skirmishes, but through exposure to the harsh winter conditions. Mercifully for those men and for Wilson, within the month the evacuation of Gallipoli had been completed. It is claimed that the Gallipoli campaign, that 8 months of hell and loss on both sides of the conflict, did much to embed a sense of national identity within both Australia and New Zealand. If this is truly the case, then we can also reflect upon what kind of national identity we might claim today. If the rise of our own form of patriotism was predicated upon such death and destruction, have we made the most of that sacrifice, that great mistake. I wonder if those men could speak to us today. What would they make of this nation now? What would they think of the things we deem so important today? We have spent generations debating the merits of war and the very concept of heroism. How would those who died judge us for the way we conduct our lives in a time when we have never been, and may never be, asked to do what was asked of them? When pride and performance seems now somehow less valued than the pronouns we attach to ourselves, when perseverance and persistence, not to mention personal sacrifice, is so dubiously replaced with the false piety of posturing social media platforming, when pasting a slogan over a profile picture is considered a genuine protest, how in this age does one take a stand against tyranny, both overt and insidious? How does one serve the common good in an increasingly fractured and atomised world? Frank Wilson, I believe, must have believed he was serving the common good, but his death robbed his community of a leader, robbed his family of a son, robbed his future of a most meaningful and valuable contribution. Wilson may have been an All Black, but that did not define him, any more than his love of roses and carnations, his dedication to primary school teaching, his gymnasium run in conjunction with the All Saint Church, his passion for singing in the choir. As Frank Wilson's obituary in the School Chronicle read, he was, and I quote, a man of many parts, and he was never happier than when he was doing something, again I quote, for the boys. Frank Wilson may not be the most famous Auckland Grammar School old boy, not even the most famous to have died in World War I, but there is something in this man's character, his active and complete participation in all areas of life, his willingness to give freely of his time, his desire to get the best out of himself and to give the best of himself, that is deeply resonant with the values of the school and the values of our community. In today's age, we have the freedom to debate the merits and the follies of war. We have the freedom to critically analyse the motivations, the tactics, the negligence, the wanton wastefulness and the geopolitical framework upon which the entire travesty was ultimately constructed. We have the freedom to understand how the aftermath of the First World War radically altered the course of the 20th century and led the world inexorably into a conflict even more horrific in its scale and in its human cost. That is the privilege of subsequent generations, of my generation, and hopefully of many future generations to come. There will be those who do not wish to commemorate this day, or for whom the threads of connection to the two world wars now feels ever more frayed and tenuous. But if we consider what it is we remember, perhaps we can all agree on the responsibility granted to us. ANZAC Day, in my opinion, is not a celebration of war. It is not a celebration of heroes, reluctant or otherwise. It is, however, a day to reflect on service. It is a day to think about our service. I do not mean service of a military kind. I mean service in the more general sense of the word. It is a day for us to think about the many young men who never had the chance to reach their full potential, who never had the chance to be a citizen in his own walk of life. In remembering that, we remind ourselves that in their sacrifice, we also recognise their dreams and their aspirations. We recognise the young man who may have become a teacher, the young man who may have become an incredible father, the young man who may have been a civic leader, the young man who may have given back to generations of young New Zealanders, a young man who may have inspired all around him through virtuous and selfless existence, a young man like Frank Reginald Wilson, dead at 31. To again quote the aforementioned R.W. Firth in the 1918 School Chronicle, To a certain extent, the worth of these men who have served the Empire springs from those innate qualities without which no man can be capable of sacrifice or service to his native country. But in a large degree, their characters are moulded by the influences of school life. And so to the opportunity this day grants us, and a question to the young grammar men in our midst. And I would ask all current students here with us today to please stand very briefly. Gentlemen. This, gentlemen, is your service, to allow you to reflect upon how you might be of service. This is your reminder to make the most of the time that is granted to you. This is a call to understand your potential and to know that if you aim for your best, if you give of yourself and ask nothing in return, if you seek to serve a purpose greater than yourself and always think of others less fortunate than you, then you will honour your fellow grammarians who did not have it so lucky. Ladies and gentlemen, while our boys stand, in 4 years' time, imagine if every one of them was gone. Thank you, boys. You may be seated. The school's war memorial was updated in 1953 to pay tribute to those who died in the Second World War. It is estimated 1 in every 30 New Zealanders who died in that conflict was connected to this school. In his moving and memorable address to mark the occasion, Headmaster Cooper surveyed the names freshly inscribed. Here, he said, is the dux of the school, a lad of outstanding mental powers, first in the scholarship exam, later to crown a brilliant university career by winning the coveted Rhodes Scholarship. He, alas, fell mortally wounded at the River Senio a few short days before the final victorious breakthrough. 3 of his form mates from the upper 6th are with him on the roll, 5 of the first 15. We can see them still. The fullback, cool and resourceful. A wing 3/4, fast and determined in his running. A halfback of more than usual promise. 2 strapping forwards. 2 prefects. 3 of the first 11. 2 boxing champions. The winner of the senior 440-yard race. What a terrible list that must have been to read out. What promise lost. What heartbreak shared by this community. Scholars, sportsmen, leaders, gone. Names inscribed on honours boards and fading black and white photographs of form classes and sports teams, all that remain. That and you, in this room, within these walls, erected in a time of mass destruction and enormous loss, standing as a monument to a brighter future in which our young men can fulfil their promise. If not for them, if not for their community, then perhaps for those who came before and who did not get their chance. Angusta Ad Augusta, lest we forget.